Welcome to another deep dive, tailor-made just for you. Today, we're plunging into a historical event that quite literally brought one of the world's greatest cities to a suffocating standstill. Imagine a city famous for its bustling energy, its iconic red buses, its vibrant theater district, suddenly plunged into an impenetrable, toxic darkness. We're talking about the Great Smog of London in December 1952. This wasn't just a grim weather report, it was a profound environmental and public health crisis that forever reshaped our understanding of urban air quality and, well, forced a nation to confront an invisible killer.
It's a stark chapter indeed. Picture a fog so incredibly dense that it didn't just obscure landmarks, but actually seeped insidiously indoors, canceling performances mid-act, bringing all forms of transport to an eerie halt, and even entering people's homes, leaving this sort of gritty film on everything. While Londoners had been accustomed to their characteristic pea soupers for centuries, a familiar part of city life, this event was something entirely and frankly terrifyingly different. The sheer scale of its impact, initially dismissed and tragically revealed, was unprecedented in the United Kingdom. It really makes it a pivotal, undeniable moment in environmental history.
Okay, so our mission today is to thoroughly unpack the diverse sources you've shared with us. We'll move from contemporary reports, which, as you said, often miss the true horror, to modern-day scientific and economic analyses that reveal the full, devastating scope of what happened during those 5 fateful days in December 1952. We're going to meticulously explore the precise atmospheric conditions that conspired to trap this toxic blanket, uncover the surprising origins of its lethal components, delve into the profound and often delayed human cost, vividly recount how the city ground to a complete standstill, trace the powerful public outcry that ultimately forced political action, and finally examine the landmark legislative responses that fundamentally changed the very air we breathe today.
Exactly. Our goal is to seek out every grain of discovery within this rich material. We'll meticulously dissect the complex mechanisms behind this catastrophic pollution event, scrutinize the groundbreaking guidelines that emerged from it, discuss the controversies and, well, the resistance encountered along the way, and ultimately analyze the lasting social and economic implications that continue to resonate even now. By the end of this deep dive, you won't just be well-informed about a dark and defining chapter in London's past, you'll also gain crucial insights into the evolving nature of invisible environmental threats, threats that continue to challenge us in new ways in the 21st century. So let's dig into this.
Okay. So, for centuries, London has been famous, almost romantically sometimes, for its fogs. It's part of the city's identity, right? Even appearing in literature and art. You mentioned the pioneering diarist John Evelyn way back in 1661 penned Fumi Fugium, or The Inconveniency of the A Smoke of London Dissipated, which is considered the first book ever written about air pollution, detailing how coal smoke corrupted the city's air. So, London had a long, grim history with dirty air, but the event we're diving into, the Great Smog of December 1952, was on an entirely different catastrophic scale.
Absolutely. And what's truly insightful here is how easily societies can become, well, desensitized to these slow-burning, persistent environmental crises. While London certainly had a long, documented history of poor air quality, stretching back to at least the 13th century when King Edward I tried, unsuccessfully mind you, to ban coal-burning bottling, the 1952 smog transcended anything previously experienced. Our sources describe it as many times worse than anything the city had ever experienced before. It's now formally recognized as the worst air pollution event in the history of the United Kingdom. Its significance lies not just in its immediate devastating impact, which was immense, but crucially in its role as a powerful, undeniable catalyst. A catalyst for environmental research, government regulation, and a much-needed public awareness of the profound relationship between air quality and health. This event really forced a national reckoning with threats that had previously just been dismissed as, mere weather.
It's still baffling, though, to think an event so cataclysmic didn't trigger immediate panic. The sheer density, the profound disruption, it sounds like something out of a disaster movie. Yet the sources indicate an initial, almost apathetic acceptance. Londoners were so accustomed to their pea soupers that there was, apparently, no panic. And initial media reports, perhaps reflecting this public mood, said very little about the health effects. Why? What historical factors or societal norms in 1950s London might explain this collective downplaying of such a clear and present danger?
Well, this collective downplaying, or as you put it, apathetic acceptance, is a critical aspect of understanding the smog. The familiarity with London particulars, that's a term so prevalent that even the New York Times used it back in 1855 to describe dense fogs. It meant that what might seem utterly catastrophic to us now was simply perceived as a more extreme version of everyday life for them. The public had, in a sense, been desensitized to chronically poor air quality. There was a prevailing, almost fatalistic perception that coal smoke was an inevitable trade-off for economic progress, necessary byproduct of industry and keeping homes warm, or just an unchangeable part of the London atmosphere.
Right, just part of the deal of living there.
Exactly. People had learned to live with it, even romanticize it sometimes. They'd adapted their daily routines to navigate limited visibility and cough through smoky air. However, the sheer physical reach of this particular smog, initially underestimated, extended far beyond the capital. It covered upwards of 1,000 square miles across many parts of the British Isles, although its most severe and recognized effects were undoubtedly concentrated in London, particularly within the Thames Valley. That's where the atmospheric conditions were most extreme. This broader geographical spread hinted at a problem far larger than just a local inconvenience.
Okay, so if London fogs were common, what exactly were the unique meteorological conditions that transformed a familiar, smoky London fog into such a deadly lasting event in December 1952? It wasn't just a bit of mist, was it? It sounds like something far more sinister, really a perfect storm of atmospheric elements.
Oh, far from a bit of mist. No. This event was denser and longer lasting than any previous pea super. For 5 relentless days, from Friday, December 5th to Tuesday, December 9th, 1952, London was plunged into what one visitor vividly described as being like you were blind. Visibility reduced to a few meters, sometimes terrifyingly, less than half a meter. This wasn't just a visual inconvenience, it was a profound, suffocating environmental shift.
Hard to even walk down the street.
Absolutely. And the key meteorological factor was a severe and incredibly persistent temperature inversion. Normally, air near the ground warms, becomes lighter, rises, and carries pollutants away to dissipate higher up. You get mixing. But during a temperature inversion, the opposite happens. A layer of warmer air settles above a layer of colder, denser air close to the ground.
Like trap.
Exactly like a trap. This warmer layer acts like an impenetrable atmospheric lid, effectively trapping all the emissions, smoke, pollutants, everything beneath it, preventing them from rising and dispersing vertically. Our sources explicitly mention that inversions tend to cover large areas, which explains why its effects were felt across other parts of Britain, though London got the worst of it. The stability created by this inversion was unprecedented in its duration and intensity for London. It just sat there.
So it was literally a dirty gray blanket draped over the city, as one contemporary novel described it, and this blanket just sat there, accumulating all the emissions from below. Can you elaborate on how this unusual atmospheric stillness turned something relatively common into something so utterly catastrophic? It feels like a subtle shift, but with lethal consequences.
You've hit on the critical point there. The atmospheric stillness created by this incredibly strong and enduring temperature inversion was the precise mechanism. It transformed a typical, albeit smoky, London fog into an utterly lethal event. Without the normal vertical mixing of air, everything emitted just stayed trapped at incredibly low levels.
Nowhere for it to go.
Nowhere. It was quite literally like a colossal, invisible bell jar had been placed over the entire city, a contained chamber where pollutants could build up without any natural ventilation. And this was dangerously compounded by the cold temperatures during those 5 days.
Ah, so people needed heating.
Exactly, which naturally and dramatically increased the demand for both domestic heating, people burning coal in their homes, and industrial heating from factories and power plants. So you get this self-reinforcing deadly cycle. The colder it got, the more fuel was burned, leading to more emissions. And with the inversion holding these emissions close to the ground, they were concentrated to an extreme, unprecedented, and ultimately lethal degree. The stillness allowed pollutants to build up to concentrations that were simply unbearable and highly toxic for human respiration, unlike any pea super London had ever endured before.
That paints a truly terrifying picture. So what was actually in that dirty gray blanket? Where did all that toxic material come from? It wasn't just plain old smoke, was it? We're talking about something far more complex and dangerous than just visual pollution.
No, not just smoke. The principal culprit was, unequivocally, coal burning. Specifically, the widespread and often inefficient combustion of coal for both domestic and industrial purposes. Our sources make it abundantly clear that low-level emissions from Britain's home fires played a major role, alongside the output from industrial premises factories, power stations dotted across the city and surrounding areas. You have to remember, Britain's industrial revolution, as one source notes, had hinged on the use of coal. Coal was inseparable from British life. It was the nation's primary energy source for everything.
Powering everything, heating everyone.
Pretty much. This extensive, almost universal reliance meant millions of domestic chimneys were constantly belching smoke alongside countless industrial furnaces, all contributing to the atmospheric load. The sheer volume of coal being consumed daily, particularly for heating in that cold December weather, was immense, creating a continuous, overwhelming stream of pollutants.
And it wasn't just the sheer volume, was it? You mentioned inefficiency. The specific type of coal and crucially how it was burned contributed immensely to the problem, making the emissions even more noxious than they might have been otherwise. This points to a deeper societal issue beyond just fuel choice, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The methods of combustion were a critical factor. Domestic use, for instance, overwhelmingly involved bituminous coal, burned in open grates. This type of coal, often called soft coal, has a relatively high sulfur content, and when you burn it in inefficient open fireplaces, you get less complete combustion.
Meaning more soot and tar.
Exactly. Leading to greater levels of tar and soot, the visible black smoke compared to industrial furnaces, which might have had slightly more controlled conditions. And beyond the type of coal, the everyday practices born out of necessity and habit just intensified the problem. People would commonly do what was called banking up the fire at night with coal dust or burn nutty slack, which is a very low-quality, cheap coal dust, just to keep homes warm overnight, especially in unheated bedrooms.
Trying to stay warm, but making things worse.
Unintentionally, yes. These methods produced even more smoke and particulate matter, maximizing the release of harmful components. The smog itself was formally identified as a sulfurous fog, meaning it contains significant amounts of sulfur dioxide, SO2, a direct byproduct of burning coal, especially those high sulfur types.
Okay, so beyond the visible black smoke and the sulfur you could probably smell, what were the invisible, insidious components of this blanket that truly made it so deadly? We know what people could see and smell, but what was really doing the damage at a microscopic, almost undetectable level?
Well, this brings us to the core of the smog's lethality, the unseen elements. Coal combustion releases not just black carbon, which gives the smog its darkness and grittiness, and sulfur dioxide, but also a really complex mixture of organic carbons and toxic elements, such as arsenic, silicon dioxide, cadmium, and calcium oxide, along with other highly dangerous toxins such as fluorine, selenium, and lead. These are heavy metals and other poisonous compounds that, when inhaled, can have profound systemic effects.
Wow, that's a nasty cocktail.
It really is. And crucially, perhaps most insidiously, the black smoke contained extremely fine particulate matter, specifically PM 4.4 and PM 2.5. Now, to put this in perspective, we're talking about particles so tiny, less than 2.5 to 4.4 micrometers in diameter. They're many times smaller than the width of a human hair. These microscopic particles could penetrate deeply into the respiratory system and reach a wide range of internal organs.
Bypassing the body's defenses.
Completely. Unlike larger particles that get trapped in the nose or throat, these ultrafine particles go straight into the deepest parts of the lungs and even enter the bloodstream. From there, they can affect the cardiovascular system, the nervous system, other organs. The lack of visibility was terrifying, yes, but these microscopic particles were the true silent killers, infiltrating every breath.
Okay, let's pause there for a quick recap. Looking back, we've established that the Great Smog wasn't just a thick mist, but a prolonged atmospheric inversion that lit effect trapping a lethal cocktail of pollutants. These pollutants came primarily from widespread, often inefficient coal burning in both homes and industries. We learned about the specific components, not just the visible smoke, but sulfur dioxide and, crucially, those tiny, dangerous, fine particles like PM 2.5. What stands out most starkly about the insidious nature of this familiar London fog, suddenly transformed into a killer by this toxic mix of environmental conditions and society's deep reliance on coal. It feels like a perfect deadly storm.
It really was. What stands out is how a combination of normal factors, familiar fog, cold weather, reliance on coal, could interact with an abnormal meteorological event, the persistent inversion, to create something utterly unprecedented and catastrophic. It highlights the vulnerability of complex urban systems and how quickly normal can become lethal when environmental conditions shift just enough to tip the balance. The invisibility of the deadliest components, those fine particles, is also profoundly chilling.
That really brings home the chilling reality. So, moving to the human dimension. Initially, as we mentioned, the public reaction was strangely calm, almost apathetic, and the media focused on everything but the human toll. What did they report on, and when did the true horror of the health impact finally begin to emerge? It seems like there was a significant delay in understanding the suffering.
Yes, the initial public and media reaction was regrettably disconnected from the unfolding human tragedy. The media, as our sources vividly reveal, focused heavily, almost exclusively, on the immediate disruptions to daily life that were so obvious. They reported extensively on the disruption of transport, which was monumental, bringing much of the city to a standstill. They highlighted the cancellation of almost every sporting fixture because you just couldn't see. The popular press, much like today perhaps, concentrated on what was claimed to be an enormous increase in street crime, though this might have been more sensationalism than verified fact, playing into public fears.
And the cattle.
And the cattle, yes. Perhaps most strikingly, media interest was heavily captured by the death of prize cattle at the Smithfield Show, a well-known agricultural exhibition. This focus on livestock, rather than human suffering, really illustrates a deeply disturbing disconnect in public perception at the time. Nothing about human illness or death was reported until much later, primarily because it simply took weeks for mortality returns to be meticulously compiled and analyzed in that pre-computing era. A preliminary government report, which was never finalized or publicly released, initially tried to blame the deaths on an influenza epidemic.
Trying to explain it away.
Exactly. Rationalize it as a natural occurrence. But emerging evidence quickly contradicted this, suggesting only a fraction of the deaths could plausibly be attributed to influenza alone.
So, if the media and initial government reports were so off the mark, who finally put the grim pieces together? Who connected the dots, and what did they discover that shifted the narrative so dramatically? This is where the dry data transforms into a truly harrowing human story.
Well, the hero of this grim statistical detective story, if you can call him that, was E.T. Wilkins. He was the officer in charge of atmospheric pollution at the government's Department of Scientific and Industrial Research. Basically, the UK's leading expert on air pollution at the time. And he went beyond those initial misleading reports. By meticulously plotting elevated death rates for the extended period from December 1952 right through to March 1953, he found something shocking. An additional 8,000 deaths beyond those initially counted, making 12,000 in total.
12,000.
12,000. This was a staggering revelation that vastly expanded the understanding of the smog's true lethality, revealed a silent mass casualty event unfolding. Most of these deaths were directly attributable to respiratory tract infections caused by a combination of hypoxia, that's a severe lack of oxygen in the body's tissues, and mechanical obstruction of the air passages by catarrh and pus arising from lung infections, directly induced by the toxic smog.
So the smog was literally clogging people's airways.
Yes, in essence. It wasn't just irritating their lungs, it was causing such profound inflammation and infection that their airways literally began to clog with thick, infected mucus and fluid, what the medical reports grimly called catarrh and pusses. Imagine trying to breathe through a waterlogged sponge that's also inflamed. This led to severe oxygen deprivation. Patients were quite literally drowning from the inside out, their lungs failing. The primary medical diagnoses documented were bronchial pneumonia or acute purulent bronchitis superimposed upon chronic bronchitis, indicating severe acute infection on top of existing conditions. And there was also a notable increase in cardiac admissions, suggesting the smog's impact extended to the heart as well, putting immense strain on the cardiovascular system.
It's clear the smog disproportionately affected certain groups, particularly the vulnerable. What did hospital staff witness on the front lines during this period? How did they cope with such an overwhelming influx of severely ill patients? What were those scenes like?
Oh, the clinical picture in hospitals was grim, chaotic, and deeply alarming for the staff. They witnessed middle-aged and elderly people, principally men, gasping for breath with extreme respiratory distress. Many of these patients already had advanced chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, a condition massively exacerbated by the near-universal cigarette smoking in men at the time.
So smokers were particularly vulnerable.
Extremely. Because of their seriously impaired ventilation distribution within the lungs, the polluted air could rapidly induce acute bronchiolitis, severe inflammation of the small airways, which might quickly become fatal due to their already compromised lung function. Hospitals were utterly overwhelmed. The sheer volume meant patients with acute respiratory distress spilled over into all wards, regardless of the specialty or gender. Even surgical and obstetric wards were used.
Just anywhere they could put them.
Anywhere. Oxygen supplies, a vital lifeline, were stretched to the limit, reflecting the desperate need for respiratory support. The situation was so dire that morticians ran out of space in the mortuary and in the chapel of rest. They had to resort to using the anatomy department's dissecting room in another building to store the deceased as bodies piled up.
That's horrifying.
It is. And Sir Donald Aitchison, a medical professional working in London then, who later became chief medical officer, he speculated chillingly that More people died at home without help than died in hospital, which underscores the unseen, unquantified extent of the tragedy beyond those official counts. The 12,000 figure might even be an underestimate.
That's a truly harrowing thought, people dying alone at home unseen. And the impact wasn't just immediate, was it? We're talking about long-lasting health consequences that resonate even today, decades later. This highlights the insidious, slow-burn nature of air pollution's devastation.
Absolutely. And this raises a profoundly important question about the long tail of such extreme environmental events. It introduces the crucial concept of early life exposure. Research highlighted in our sources, specifically a study titled Early Life Exposure to the Great Smog, presents the first evidence of long-lasting effects from early childhood exposure to this catastrophe. They found, disturbingly, that children exposed to the intense air pollution within the first year of life were significantly more likely to develop asthma during both childhood and adulthood.
Wow. A lifelong impact from just those few days.
It seems so. The data indicates a 19.9 percentage point increased likelihood of developing asthma during childhood for those born in London between December 1951 and November 1952, the cohort exposed in their first year or in utero. This aligns profoundly with the fetal origins hypothesis, a significant concept in modern public health and epigenetics. This hypothesis basically says that rapid biological development during early life prenatal infancy is uniquely sensitive to external stimuli. Exposure to harmful stuff during these critical windows can lead to permanent changes in development, affecting genetic expression, things like DNA methylation, and predisposing individuals to later diseases, like asthma.
So the damage wasn't just acute, it was potentially hardwired into their developing bodies.
That's the implication, yes. A truly long shadow cast by those few days.
And what about even earlier life stages, perhaps even before birth? And how does this historical data, particularly about black smoke, that visible component, inform our understanding of health impacts and maybe the effectiveness of policy today? It seems this event keeps offering lessons.
Indeed, the lessons extend even earlier. Research on the long-term impact of the 1956 Clean Air Act reveals it had a large impact on infant mortality, which demonstrates the profound sensitivity of the very youngest populations to air quality improvements. Specifically, the study found that for every microgram reduction in black smoke concentration, infant mortality reduced by 0.04 deaths per 1,000 births.
A direct measurable link.
A direct measurable link. And this effect was notably particularly striking for boys. The research even suggests a possible fertility-inhibiting effect from the pollution itself, hinting at deeper biological impacts. Now, if we connect this to the bigger picture and think about counterfactuals, modern analysis extrapolates what London's air quality would be like today if it still had the 1952 domestic fuel mix. The findings are stark, a powerful warning. Such conditions would result in 1,633 additional brought forwards deaths per year.
An extra 1,600 deaths annually.
Yes, representing a 22% increase in mortality compared to present-day levels. Furthermore, it would lead to 3,392 hospital admissions per year attributable to PM10 concentrations, which is a massive 235% increase from current admissions. This isn't just dry history. It's a stark illustration of the potential ongoing human cost of uncontrolled air pollution. It underscores the critical life-saving importance of the legislative action that followed 1952.
Okay, let's do a mega recap here, as we've covered a huge amount on the human cost. We started with the initial underestimation, the media focusing on disruption and even cattle, not people. Then came the grim reality, thanks to figures like E.T. Wilkins, revealing 12,000 deaths, mostly from respiratory infections like bronchial pneumonia and acute purulent bronchitis, basically people suffocating. We heard about overwhelmed hospitals, the terrible vulnerability of the elderly, those with chronic conditions like COPD, and smokers, and maybe most disturbingly, the long shadow. Evidence linking early life exposure during the smog to increased asthma rates decades later, highlighting the fetal origins hypothesis, plus the later data showing reductions in black smoke significantly lowered infant mortality. So the key terms popping up here are obviously the Great Smog of 1952, E.T. Wilkins who quantified the deaths, the specific diseases like bronchial pneumonia and acute purulent bronchitis, the concept of the fetal origins hypothesis, the pollutant measure of black smoke, those dangerous PM2.5 particles, and the impact on infant mortality. Thinking about all this, what critical insights does the immediate aftermath, the slow realization of the tragedy, offer regarding how we handle public health crises and make policy when faced with these invisible but lethal threats?
I think the biggest insight is the danger of complacency and the critical need for rapid, accurate data collection and analysis in a crisis. The delay in recognizing the death toll costs lives. It also highlights the importance of looking beyond the obvious disruptions like transport to the hidden health impacts. And it underscores the vulnerability of specific populations and the need for targeted protection. Finally, the long-term effects on children exposed in utero or infancy really drive home that the consequences of environmental disasters can span generations, making proactive prevention absolutely paramount. You can't just clean up afterwards. The damage might already be done in ways you can't see for decades.
Absolutely. Now, beyond the tragic and initially hidden health impacts, the Great Smog literally brought London to a grinding, eerie halt. You touched on transport stopping, but what did daily life actually look like under that dirty gray blanket?
Well, the city was thrown into complete chaos. It's hard to overstate. Visibility was so catastrophically poor, often, as we said, less than half a meter, that navigating the streets became virtually impossible for anyone. Driving was described as difficult or, at times, impossible. You had widespread abandonment of vehicles by drivers just leaving them in the middle of roads, creating these ghostly outlines in the gloom.
Unbelievable.
Public transport ceased, apart from the London Underground, which became the only functioning lifeline for movement across the city, though even conditions below ground were apparently pretty grim, with the smog filtering in. And perhaps most alarmingly, as mentioned, even the ambulance service stopped. This paralyzed emergency medical care. It forced individuals needing help to try and transport themselves to hospitals through that dense, suffocating haze, often an arduous and impossible task for the elderly or severely ill. Imagine the uncanny, terrifying quiet that must have fallen over the city, broken only by sounds of disoriented people stumbling along, unable to see, bumping into things or each other.
I can only imagine the sheer disorientation, that feeling of being trapped and blind in your own city. One source you shared captures it perfectly with a personal anecdote, painting such a vivid picture. It really brings the abstract concept of poor visibility home.
It does. It really sticks with you. It highlights the profound psychological and practical impact. Sir Donald Aitchison, the medical professional we mentioned earlier, recounted this chilling experience. He described losing himself in a street in London which I knew like the back of my hand. He said, I couldn't see anything, had no idea where I was, and had to go to the wall and feel my way until I could find a sign giving the name of the street to see where I was. And that was really unpleasant.
Just feeling your way along a wall in a familiar street.
Exactly. This perfectly illustrates that pervasive sense of being utterly lost and vulnerable in your own familiar surroundings, a deep disruption of the normal spatial awareness we all take for granted. It wasn't just about not driving. It was about not being able to walk safely or find your way even a few meters. The very fabric of urban navigation just collapsed.
And it wasn't just the outdoors that were affected, was it? The smog permeated everything, making even supposedly safe indoor spaces feel contaminated and unusable. That idea of pollution invading your home feels uniquely invasive.
That's spot on. The smog was so dense that it even seeped indoors, infiltrating homes, shops, offices, public venues alike. This meant even interior spaces became murky, gritty, and deeply unpleasant. It led to widespread cancellation or abandonment of concerts and film screenings. Visibility inside large enclosed spaces decreased so dramatically that stages and screens became harder to see from the seats, making performances impossible.
You couldn't even see the film screen.
Apparently not, in some places. The air indoors became thick and gritty, carrying that acrid smell of coal smoke. You could literally write your name on the layer of black dust that settled on furniture. Even outdoor sporting events were canceled, which, as we heard, got a lot of media attention. There's one particularly poignant anecdote from the sources, from an undertaker's son. He remembered the grim surge in business, obviously, but also the personal frustration. He couldn't take his date to the cinema because, as he put it, fog would just roll into the cinema and everybody would have to go home then.
Wow.
It truly highlights how every facet of life, from emergency services and leisure to personal relationships and even the rituals of death, was impacted by this suffocating, all-encompassing event. It transformed London into a ghost city, practically speaking.
Okay, another micro recap here. We've just explored how the Great Smog literally brought London to its knees. It paralyzed transport except the tube. It permeated indoor spaces, canceling events and making homes gritty. It utterly disoriented even lifelong residents like Sir Donald Aitchison feeling his way along familiar streets. What immediate dramatic changes did the smog force upon Londoners, and how do you think it changed their perception of their city and its famed, almost romanticized fogs forever? It feels like innocence was lost.
I think the immediate change was the sudden, terrifying realization of vulnerability. The city, usually a place of connection and movement, became isolating and dangerous. The fog wasn't romantic anymore. It was a tangible threat that could trap you, blind you, even invade your home. It must have shattered the perception of the fog as just atmospheric backdrop. It became an active antagonist. This profound disruption likely laid the groundwork for the public outcry that followed, transforming annoyance into genuine fear and anger once the death toll became known. The familiar had become fatal.
Right. So, despite this clear chaos, this paralysis, and the mounting, though initially uncounted deaths, the initial government response was, shall we say, less than enthusiastic. How did they react officially, and what finally spurred the shift away from that denial?
Well, the initial government response was, to put it mildly, characterized by profound dragging of feet and a deep-seated resistance to acknowledging the human-made elements of the disaster. They emphatically preferred to frame the Great Smog as simply a natural disaster that had been impossible to prevent. An act of God, nothing we could do.
Shrugging it off.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
This narrative of inevitability was glaringly evident in the response of the Minister for Health at the time, Ian MacLeod. When pressed on the issue, he famously retorted, quite dismissively, really, anyone would think fog had only started in London since I became minister.
Wow, that's quite a statement.
It is. And it perfectly illustrated this significant gap between the escalating crisis on the ground, the mounting deaths, and the official political recognition of its severity, and, crucially, its anthropogenic, its human-made causes. You have to remember, there was a long history of government apathy towards air pollution. Pressure groups, like smoke abatement societies, had been campaigning for decades, but their calls were largely ignored. Policymakers saw smoke as an inevitable trade-off for industry and progress. The idea of intervening in how people heated their homes was almost unthinkable.
It's astounding that such a dismissive attitude could persist, given the scale of death and disruption that must have been apparent, even if the numbers weren't official yet. So what ultimately forced their hand? What was the definitive tipping point that moved this issue from a mere local nuisance or a natural event to a national crisis demanding action? It sounds like public opinion must have played a huge role.
You're absolutely right. Public opinion was crucial. The transformation in both public and political perception was slow, but ultimately inevitable. It was driven by that irrefutable data once it emerged, and also by changing societal expectations. The sheer scale of the deaths, that 12,000 figure once fully revealed by people like E.T. Wilkins, coupled with intense and sustained pressure from the public and the press, finally made the issue undeniable. Also, the formation of the National Health Service, NHS, after World War II was important. It was a foundational shift in British society, and it had instilled a stronger sense of national responsibility for health.
People expected the government to do more now.
Exactly. It fundamentally raised public expectations for government action beyond a mere laissez-faire approach. Harold Macmillan, who was then the Minister of Housing and Local Government, initially stoutly resisted all calls for an inquiry right up until May 1953, months after the event. But he eventually conceded, and he acknowledged in a telling memo to the cabinet that, quote, smog has captured the imagination of the press and the people, and that in the new welfare state, everybody expects the government to solve every problem.
A reluctant acceptance of responsibility.
A reluctant but crucial recognition of the shifting public mood and the state's broadened role. That ultimately forced their hand, making an official inquiry politically unavoidable.
Okay, so the public outcry finally led to official action. What was the first concrete step towards actually understanding and addressing this monumental problem? And how did it fundamentally shift the focus away from blaming just industry?
The first concrete and truly impactful step was the government's appointment of the industrialist Sir Hugh Beaver to chair a committee of inquiry into air pollution. This was in July 1953. This became known as the Beaver Committee. The reports generated by this committee, issued in two phases, November 1953 and November 1954, were foundational, groundbreaking, really. They unequivocally stated that low-level emissions from Britain's home fires played a major role in causing high rates of respiratory deaths year in and year out, not just during acute smog episodes like 1952.
So not just blaming factories anymore.
Exactly. This finding was revolutionary. It fundamentally shifted the focus from merely industrial pollution, which had traditionally been the main concern, to domestic sources. It challenged that long-held, almost cherished notion that coal smoke from homes was just an unavoidable, maybe even comforting part of everyday life. It revealed it as a pervasive year-round killer. This was a critical reevaluation that would profoundly shape all subsequent legislative efforts. It moved the problem from the factory gate right into every single home.
And the committee didn't just point fingers, did they? They put numbers on it, quantified the economic damage, and proposed a truly radical solution for the time. They provided the hard data and the bold vision.
Precisely. The Beaver Committee went beyond simply identifying the problem. They quantified its devastating, far-reaching economic toll. They estimated the costs of smoke pollution at a massive $250 million per annum, a staggering figure for the 1950s that profoundly underscored the economic burden of inaction. This calculation included time lost to illness, so reduced productivity, and extensive damage to buildings and vegetation, showing the corrosive effects on infrastructure and nature.
So bad for health and bad for the economy.
Clearly, it demonstrated that poor air quality wasn't just a health crisis, but an enormous economic drain. And their key recommendation was groundbreaking and, for the time, quite radical. Coal smoke from domestic chimneys, as well as from industrial premises, should be outlawed in urban areas.
Outlawed completely. That's huge.
Huge. An audacious and politically challenging ask, because it directly targeted deeply ingrained cultural practices and economic necessities. It explicitly acknowledged that tackling this would require a national effort and entail costs and sacrifices from the public. It meant individuals would literally have to accept the necessity of giving up their right to use an open coal fire in urban areas, challenging a centuries-old tradition. This recommendation, though controversial, laid the essential groundwork for the comprehensive legislative changes that were to come, a pivotal, almost unthinkable moment in British environmental policy.
Okay, so the Beaver Committee's recommendations really set the stage for one of the most significant pieces of environmental legislation in British history. Tell us about the Clean Air Act of 1956. How did it try to translate those visionary but tricky recommendations into actual law?
Well, the 1956 Clean Air Act directly implemented the Beaver Committee's findings. It really marked a landmark moment in environmental regulation, not just for Britain, but globally. Its core provisions were twofold. It introduced smoke control areas and grants to switch from polluting to cleaner technologies. Firstly, it notably prohibited the emission of dark smoke from industries nationwide. That directly addressed a major source of visible industrial pollution. Factories had to clean up or switch fuel.
Tackling the big chimneys first.
Yes, but more importantly and more controversially, it empowered local authorities to create smoke control areas, SCAs. Within these designated SCAs, any smoke emission of any color from any premises, and this is the key bit, including domestic dwellings, was strictly banned.
So hitting the home fires, too.
Directly. A legally enforceable challenge to the pervasive use of smoky bituminous coal in homes. The violation of a smoke control order was intentionally made easy to detect, often just by visual observation. An inspector could literally see smoke coming from a chimney. Ease of enforcement was key. And the penalty. An initial fine of £10, which was a substantial sum back then, equivalent to a male manual worker's average gross weekly earnings in 1956.
A serious deterrent.
A serious financial deterrent, signaling a real commitment to change.
So it bravely targeted both industrial and domestic sources and had a clear, significant penalty. But was compliance immediate and widespread? Did people readily give up their cherished centuries-old coal fires, or did the implementation face, well, hurdles?
Oh, definitely not immediate or universally smooth, which really reveals the complexities and political challenges of enacting such widespread behavioral and infrastructure change. While private dwellings received a financial compensation for 70% of the cost of adjusting the building to comply, things like converting fireplaces or installing gas fires, commercial entities got no such support.
Creating different incentives.
Absolutely. Which led to varied rates of adoption. Progress was undeniably slow in many areas due to a mix of factors. Persistent lack of political leadership at local levels, chronic shortages of smokeless fuel, like coke, the rising costs of conversion for households even with the grants, and significant resistance to legislation, particularly in some northern parts of the country where coal was even more deeply embedded in daily life, economically and culturally.
So it took a long time.
It did. London's smoke control program, despite being the epicenter of the '52 smog, wasn't fully completed until 1980. That's nearly a quarter century after the act. And Greater Manchester's not until 1990. In fact, they had to pass a second Clean Air Act in 1968, specifically to deal with delinquent authorities, councils that were dragging their feet. Some proactive local authorities even doubled the fine to £20, and research shows this increased the effect of the regulation on air pollution by 37%.
So bigger fines worked better?
It seems so, but the research also highlighted that poorest households disproportionately carried the cost of these stricter penalties, revealing an important distributional concern about who pays for environmental policy.
Right. So, what was the actual measurable impact of these smoke control areas on air quality once they were finally implemented? Did they truly make the air cleaner? Could we see a direct correlation between the law and less black smoke?
Yes, the research studying the impact of smoke control areas on black smoke concentration reveals clear and compelling effectiveness. The results show that SCAs significantly reduced black smoke concentration from January to March and again from October to December, but had no effect in the summer, April-September.
Why the seasonal difference?
Well, that seasonal difference is absolutely key because it directly verifies the regulation's effectiveness in targeting the use of bituminous coal for heating. Since burning that smoky coal for heating was predominantly a cold season activity, the lack of a summer effect confirms the policy was accurately targeting the source it intended to control. The lack of effect in the summer and SCA's proportional impact on black smoke concentration relative to its mean levels
Mm.
really underscores the policy's efficacy. It shows the reduction in black smoke was indeed due to the ban on burning smoky coal in these areas, not other factors. This provides strong empirical evidence of the legislation's direct environmental impact. Specific, targeted policies can achieve measurable improvements.
Okay, so it sounds like a profound success story in terms of visible smoke, literally changing the look and feel of cities. But did the act address all the problems of the 1952 smog, or were there blind spots in its scope? Was it truly a comprehensive solution?
That's a crucial question. What was missed? Well, the Clean Air Act was a monumental step forward, undeniably a success in its primary aim. Its scope was explicitly restricted to the prevention of visible smoke.
Okay.
And in that, it was undeniably successful. The amount of smoke in the air by the start of the 21st century has been dramatically reduced by 80% of the level at the time of the Great Smog.
Yeah.
London transformed visually.
But visible smoke wasn't the only killer.
Exactly. The act did not get to the root of the problem, for it was the levels of sulfur dioxide in the 1952 smog that had made people sick and caused the vast majority of deaths. While smoke and sulfur dioxide emissions are linked, both coming from coal, focusing solely on visible smoke meant that other crucial, invisible pollutants highly detrimental to health, like sulfur dioxide itself, and fine particulate matter beyond just the visible black carbon, were not fully addressed by this specific piece of legislation. So while it transformed the visual landscape and significantly improved black smoke levels, its lessons are still highly relevant. They highlight the need for comprehensive approaches that consider all toxic components, not just the ones you can see. It was a vital first step, but definitely not the last word.
Okay, another mega recap point. We've now seen how public outrage, spurred by the horrifying death toll, finally galvanized political will. This led to the Beaver Committee and its groundbreaking recommendations. This culminated in the landmark Clean Air Act 1956, which introduced smoke control areas, SCAs, grants for cleaner fuels, smokeless fuel, and fines for noncompliance, prohibiting dark smoke. While the act made monumental strides in reducing visible black smoke, its implementation faced challenges, delays, resistance, even needing a second act to deal with delinquent authorities. And crucially, we noted it didn't fully address all the toxic components, particularly sulfur dioxide, SO2, focusing primarily on visible smoke. The journey from crisis to legislation reveals this complex interplay of public demand, science, and political will, and shows even successful laws can have limitations. So, what does this historical journey teach us about adapting environmental policy to new and evolving challenges? It feels like we're always playing catch up.
I think it teaches us that legislation is often reactive, driven by crisis, but also that it can be incredibly effective when targeted correctly, even if implementation is slow and imperfect. It also shows the importance of defining the problem accurately. The focus on visible smoke was helpful but incomplete. We need to constantly update our understanding based on science. And the resistance and delays highlight that societal change, especially involving deeply ingrained habits like home heating, requires more than just laws. It needs sustained political will, economic support, readily available alternatives, and public buy-in. It's never just a simple legislative fix.
Right. So, the Clean Air Act undeniably led to cleaner air in Britain, especially concerning visible smoke. But the landscape of air pollution has changed dramatically since the 1950s. What does today's air look like, and what are the new challenges we face?
You're right. It's an ongoing adaptation. The legacy of the act is clear and quantifiable. Smoke in the air by the start of the 21st century has been reduced by 80% of the level at the time of the Great Smog. A monumental achievement, truly life-saving. However, the primary sources of pollution have indeed shifted dramatically. In London in 2019, for example, road traffic emerged as the principal source of pollution. It contributed a substantial 49.1% of all NOx emissions and 34.2% of all PM2.5 emissions, a fundamental change from the coal-dominated era.
So cars and trucks are the new chimneys, basically.
In a sense, yes, for certain key pollutants. And while sulfur dioxide concentrations, so lethal in 52, are now extremely low, approximately 1 GM3, and no longer a major concern thanks to cleaner power generation and fuels. Other pollutants like nitrogen oxides and NOx and fine particulate matter, PM2.5, from vehicles have taken their place as dominant issues. It reflects the evolution of our energy and transport systems. The problem isn't gone, it's just changed its form and source.
So different pollutants, different problems, constantly evolving. How do our current air quality levels stack up against modern health guidelines, especially given our updated scientific understanding of what constitutes safe air? Our understanding of risk has evolved significantly too, right?
It absolutely has, and this raises a deeply important question about what clean air truly means today, especially against increasingly stringent health guidelines informed by decades of research. While all UK limit values for PM2.5 are technically met, a closer look at London reveals persistent challenges. Only 7 of 28 monitoring sites actually meet the mayor's more ambitious target of 10 GMB3. Nitrogen dioxide remains a significant issue, with 48 sites out of 119 failed to achieve the annual mean air quality objective of 40 GM3.
So we're missing targets even within the UK framework.
Yes. And what's even more fascinating and concerning is that all areas of London currently exceed the new WHO air quality guidelines of 5 GMAN3 PM2.5 and 10 GMAN3 NO2, both as annual averages. These WHO guidelines are much tougher. This starkly underscores that even with significant improvements since 1952 and meeting some national targets, the available evidence cannot currently identify levels of exposure that are risk-free.
There's no truly safe level.
That's what the science currently suggests. We've moved the needle dramatically, certainly, but the goalposts for truly healthy air have also shifted significantly with our understanding. It's an ongoing challenge.
London seems to be at the forefront of trying new approaches, though. What are some of the modern solutions being implemented there to tackle these contemporary air quality issues, especially those stemming from road traffic, the biggest culprit now?
London has indeed been a trailblazer, pioneering bold actions. The world-leading ultra-low emission zone, ULEZ, is a prime example. Introduced in central London in 2019, then significantly expanded in 2021. In its first 10 months, even before the pandemic skewed things, the central ULEZ delivered remarkable benefits. A 44% reduction in harmful roadside NO2 concentrations and a 27% reduction in PM2.5.
That's a huge impact.
Huge. And alongside that, a 6% reduction in carbon dioxide, CO2, showing both air quality and climate benefits. Beyond ULEZ, the city has dramatically increased electric vehicle charging points to over 11,000, making it a leader in Europe, boosting easy adoption. London also boasts one of the largest zero-emission bus fleets in Western Europe, with more than 800 already operating, aiming for an entirely zero-emission bus fleet by 2034. Additionally, there's been a significant modal shift that's people changing how they get around away from polluting vehicles, partly encouraged by 100 kilometers plus of new and upgraded cycleways delivered during the pandemic.
So a multi-pronged approach.
Exactly. Technology, policy, infrastructure, tackling it from different angles.
Despite these impressive advancements, the sources indicate that new and perhaps surprisingly old challenges persist, beyond just tailpipe emissions. What are these less obvious yet still significant sources of pollution we're grappling with today, even in a seemingly cleaner London?
It's an evolving landscape, and some emerging challenges are quite counterintuitive, almost bringing us full circle in some ways. Surprisingly, domestic solid fuel use, the very issue at the heart of the 1952 smog, is now the largest source of PM2.5 emissions in the UK overall, even outweighing all road transport emissions.
Wood burners and things.
Exactly. Wood-burning stoves, even coal sometimes, despite bans. People do it for a homely feel, single-room heating, perceived cost savings, or just aesthetic reasons. Then there are the non-exhaust PM emissions. These come not from the engine, but from mechanical wear to brakes, tires, and road surfaces. These are a major and currently unregulated source. Studies find PM2.5 emissions from tire wear alone can be an astounding 400 times greater than from the exhaust for modern diesel vehicles, because exhaust regulations are now so strict.
So even electric vehicles create particulate pollution.
Yes, from tire and brake wear and road surface wear. This means even zero-emission vehicles at the tailpipe contribute significantly to this source. Furthermore, our understanding of Ultrafine particles, UFP particles, so small they have negligible mass but can penetrate even deeper into the body, and microplastics in the atmosphere, particularly tire and road wear particles, TRWP, is still limited, but they are of increasing concern.
New frontiers of pollution.
New frontiers demanding innovative solutions beyond just exhaust filters.
That's fascinating and unsettling, the resurgence of solid fuel burning and pollution from tires and brakes. This raises a larger question. What about the human element? The challenge of behavior change versus relying solely on technological fixes. And crucially, how does air quality intersect with the broader, urgent goal of net zero emissions for climate change? Are these issues aligned?
That is precisely the core challenge for policy going forward, that tension between tech fixes and human behavior. Historically, air pollution control has leaned heavily on technological measures because they're more predictable and easier to quantify, fitting neatly into policy models. However, relying solely on technological measures is likely to be insufficient because technology can only take us so far. Persuading people to change their behavior is difficult, takes time, the outcomes are uncertain, and such attempts are often viewed with suspicion as government meddling or nanny-statism, sparking resistance.
Tricky politics.
Very. What's truly fascinating here and critical for future policy is the interplay with net zero goals. Actions to reduce both air pollutants and greenhouse gases are often very similar, things like promoting renewables, active travel, public transport. But they aren't always perfectly aligned. Remember the past policy push for diesel cars. That was climate-motivated, lower CO2, but it proved detrimental to air quality due to higher NOx and particulates.
Unintended consequences.
Exactly. Investment decisions also matter hugely. Offshore wind power is crucial for reducing greenhouse gases, but it does little or nothing for urban air quality directly, as the benefit is far from cities. Whereas investment in home insulation could reduce the need for home heating, cutting both energy use for climate and reducing urban emissions from gas or solid fuel burning, a double win.
So we need integrated thinking.
Precisely. Critical thinking about integrated solutions that consider both climate and air quality synergies. And recognizing the crucial, often overlooked role of community engagement in encouraging behavioral shifts that technology alone just cannot achieve. It's about the whole system.
We've traveled a long road today, haven't we? From the suffocating, deadly days of the Great Smog to the complex, evolving air quality challenges of today. What are the enduring lessons we absolutely must carry forward from 1952? Not just about pollution, but about governance, public engagement, our collective responsibility.
I think the key takeaway is clear and resonates powerfully through history. Stronger government leadership, proper funding, careful planning, and critically public support are required if a new Clean Air Act is to be implemented more successfully. Or any major environmental policy, really. History teaches us unequivocally and tragically that delays in cleaning up urban air pollution cost lives, as was so starkly evident back then. But crucially, it's not just about top-down legislation, it's also about bottom-up buy-in.
Yeah.
Community outreach and engagement is particularly important.
Getting people on board.
Yes. Solutions perceived as being imposed by either national or local authorities with no engagement are much more likely to be resisted by local communities, and consequently, they're much less likely to be successful. A failure to genuinely engage means specific community concerns, unique local contexts, practical nuances might not get picked up and addressed in the policy design. That leads to less successful outcomes and ultimately undermines the very goals of cleaner air. It really has to be a shared responsibility built on trust and understanding.
So looking back at the Great Smog, it truly was a pivotal, traumatic moment. It forced a dramatic shift in how we understand and legislate for air quality and indeed for environmental health as a whole. What's the final provocative thought for our listeners as they consider the air they breathe today and the invisible, evolving challenges that still lie ahead?
Well, we've made incredible, almost miraculous strides since 1952, largely driven by the profound shock of that event and the legislation that followed. Yet, as the World Health Organization emphatically states today, acknowledging our deeper scientific understanding, the available evidence cannot currently identify levels of exposure that are risk-free, which means we still have some way to go to achieving truly clean air for everyone, everywhere. The sources of pollution have evolved dramatically from overwhelming coal smoke to today's complex mix of traffic emissions, non-exhaust particles, even that resurgence in domestic burning. But the fundamental challenge remains. How do we continuously balance economic activity, technological advancement, and individual choices with the absolute imperative of breathable, truly clean air for all? The Great Smog was a stark warning from the past, maybe the loudest one we've had. but the work, clearly, is far from over.
That's a powerful thought to leave you with the ongoing journey towards truly clean air. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Great Smog of London. It's a powerful reminder that while some threats are obvious, others are invisible, continuously evolving, and require constant vigilance, adaptation, and, well, collective action. This has been the deep dive, and we hope you walk away not just informed, but inspired to keep asking those crucial questions about the world around you. We'll see you next time.